because his team's defenses were so good, but I think it's pretty clear now that these Spurs were an elite defensive team without Duncan. He and KG actually saw similar changes in some of these defensive metrics. For instance, Minnesota couldn't protect the paint like San Antonio, but the degree of improvement in paint defense with Garnett on the court was comparable to Duncan's. And KG has the best defensive awareness of any player I've ever studied in a conservative sample. That's enough for me to give him a small edge on defense, and I value his passing and outside shooting next to better and better teammates. If that's not crazy enough for you yet, at number 7 is the controversial Steph Curry. And yes, Curry also has an argument for as high as number 3 on this list if viewed optimistically. These players are all just so ridiculously good and hard to clearly separate. Like Magic, Steph is basically providing one-way impact, but I slightly prefer his offensive package. Maybe if we look at his adjusted plus-minus over a 3-year period, Steph looks like an outlier in offensive impact. Now, one limitation with this stat is that it's hard to untangle it from the role of his team, in this case, Steve Curry's offense, which is why they don't want it with being amazing how good Curry was for the includes 2 years of Mark Jackson coaching him, and it's before he ramped up his aggression to 11 in 2016. My bigger question with Steph is whether that impact holds in the playoffs. And as we saw during this episode, I'd say it was a big night, but the general signal as a offensive force remains. From 2016 to 2019, the Warriors outscored the playoff opponents by 10 points per 48 minutes with Curry on the court, and that was a 15-point improvement when he sat in those games. Almost all of those games. It's also apparent to me that Curry has some clear negative defense. My concern there is durability related. First, could he stay healthy? And then second, could he continue to wear down his offense by targeting the other end and away from the ball? That tactic seemed to have some success, but opponents who sold out to take reduced scoring still paid a gravity tax, and since the box score can't capture that well, it makes it look like his impact declined more than it really did. At number 6, I start to get a little more comfortable with Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. There's certainly less uncertainty for me with Cap. I wouldn't drop him below 10th, although I'm a little lower on his high end than some of the surrounding players, so he lands here. Remember, this is strictly late 70s Kareem, so including a few of the prior years might even bump him up for me. He was clearly a strong rim protector, but there were also lulls in his defensive awareness. I see him well below Walton as a paint protector, but pinpointing Kareem's exact defensive impact is tricky, and minor changes would move him up a few spots on a list like this. Another challenge is gauging his offensive impact without a three-point line. More modern post players can spruce up their shot creation by kicking it out to shooters for 3, but Abdul-Jabbar didn't have that luxury. He had some post gravity and he could pass too, but it was really his crazy scoring that powered most of his value. We've talked about resiliency in this series, and that sky hook was just about as resilient as it gets. You can see from his series by series results that it was almost impossible to take away his individual scoring, but I don't think he had the playmaking to crack the inner circle of modern offensive legends. So while he's an incredible post anchor for the time, I'm not confident he has one of the 3 or 4 best peaks since the merger. At number 5, I have Larry Bird, who could go all the way back to 13th using a low-end perspective, and yes, broken record time could go all the way up to 3rd when viewed optimistically. Unlike Kareem, Bird's volume scoring is his biggest question mark in an otherwise transcendent offensive package. We know his scoring declined in the playoffs and against strong defenses, but this was still dangerous scoring among closer examination. From 1984 to 87, his adjusted playoff numbers were good, but a step down in volume compared to the best of the best. In the regular season, his scoring rate fell off against the athletic Lakers defense, but there's also reason to believe he was worn down by huge minutes in the playoffs, and that infamous bar fight in the 1985 Eastern Finals might have hampered his scoring that year too. Without Kevin McHale in the mid-80s, Bird did ramp up his volume by a few points, so I do think he traded in some of his own scoring to set up skilled teammates. And most importantly, that scoring still demanded defensive attention that kept Boston's offense at elite levels. Since we know playmaking is a huge driver of offensive impact, I think Bird's incredible passing, movement, shooting, split-second decision-making, and propensity for finding layups made him an all-time level playmaker. Like Curry, that spacing, movement, and even gravity aren't easily detectable in a stat sheet, but they do help the team's offense perform at amazing levels. For example, in 1989, Boston played 40 games with their same starting lineup from the year before, only with Reggie Lewis replacing an injured Bird. That team played slightly over 500 ball and posted a strong offensive rating relative to the league. But when the Celtics had that starting lineup together in 88, they were nearly 6 points better on offense, posting a whopping plus 9.6 offensive rating. And while it's only a single piece of information, it represents the kind of ceiling raising I think Bird had without all-time level scoring. On defense, he was a playmaker with great hands and some rim protection, and was often early in paint rotations. He was certainly limited as a perimeter defender, but that's still a good positive package, which is essentially the difference compared to Magic here, peak for peak. Much like positions 5 through 8 on this list, I could flip a coin between 3rd and 4th. Let's start with Hakeem Olajuwon, whose defense moves the needle so much that it's hard for me to have him lower than 10. That's nothing reinforces the crazy value of rim protection back in the 90s, like Hakeem averaging we have plus-minus stuff reaching back into the 90s, slightly after Olajuwon's peak, and rim protection does not increase a massive defensive value. In the 21st century, the game's best offensive players have reached greater heights than the game's that impact is primarily on offense. Ironically, it's defense that keeps the diesel down for me. The Lakers surrounded him with a ton of three-point players, and even though Shaq had success as a rim protector, his lack of mobility and engagement clearly limited his defensive punch relative to his size. In a number of series over the years, teams successfully attacked the field pick and roll, and Stillmatic could give him problems as well. Most impact metrics view his regular season defense as good, but a clear cornerstone of great defensive big men. And that defensive plus-minus might be inflated because opposing coaches played so many unskilled bigs just to bang Shaq and beat up fouls. Still, of all the players we've discussed so far, my high-end evaluation of Shaq would take him above everyone else, although there is still some separation between him and this, Michael Jordan and LeBron James. Before this series, I thought Michael had some space between